Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Let's see. Ah, yeah, that might be better.
What's up? What's up?
What's up? I think we've talked before, but I honestly kind of forgot. How long have you been a Christian for?
Since 2017, 18.
All right, awesome. And remind me, do you associate with a certain denomination, or are you just more like open?
Yeah, no denomination.
Okay.
Um, I don't believe denomination should be a thing. It's one body in Christ.
All right, I got you. I got you. And what are your thoughts on anything on the background?
You say why is I'm guessing LGBTQ wrong, right?
Yeah, sure. I don't really know too much about anything other than homosexuality referred to in the Bible, but we see verses that give like the death penalty and stuff for that, and that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
Why do you think that there's such a harsh look on this from God on?
So a harsh look because it's not, and I know where you're going to go when I say this because of the misinformation on this word, but it's not natural.
How is it not natural?
So give me 1 second to pull up. Uh, 1 second, okay?
Sure.
So, all right. So, okay. So you said, how is it not natural? So there is something called. Of course, you can go by the Merriam-Webster or any kind of dictionary definition of natural, which I don't believe we should go by that type of word or that type of definition, but we should go by more of the Aristotelian teleological definition of natural in the sense of it's not based off what happens in nature because we can see everything happens in nature, but it's based off what is supposed to happen in nature. And we're not supposed to be like, for example, if we go back to the beginning to where there was only a man and a woman, we can see, or let's say a man and a man, we can see that it's not supposed to happen because the whole lineage of people after them will not exist.
If a man and a man were the only two individuals on the entire planet, sure, I could get that, but why is that wrong? Why is that bad? Because I would take natural to be the definition of that which occurs on its own in nature. You know, humankind doesn't play a hand in it. We don't try to force something to go along. So, like certain dog breeds, we could say are quote unquote not natural because we put a heavy hand in determining their genetics and stuff like that. Whereas a different species that is created naturally on their own in the wild is something that occurred naturally on its own. We shouldn't say that, oh man, that species shouldn't exist because they're new, they're different. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, so you're going by a very generic form of the word natural because even zoophilia happens naturally where some humans are attracted to animals.
Sure,
So that
I
happens.
never
That
made the case
happens.
that just because it's natural, it's right.
Yeah. So I don't believe no, that's
But we can say it's
every.
natural.
So everything would be natural. That's why when you use the generic definition of natural, you're anything that you see is natural. So natural has no meaning because everything would be
No,
natural
a
because we
car
see
is
it.
not natural.
What do you mean cars not natural?
A car is not natural. A car is not something that occurs on its own within nature. It is something that human beings have come together to create and to put into existence of our own work. It is
So
not
you're
something
saying
that occurred on its own in the wild.
okay, but anything that occurs in the wild, still, there's a whole category besides inventions. Almost everything happens naturally. So by the going with that definition, I don't think that's the correct definition of natural. So I believe what's natural is what's supposed to happen in nature. Like we're not supposed to be seeing elephants do things with dung beetles. That would be unnatural.
So are you saying that in your definition of the word natural, which is what is supposed to be, are you saying that the reason why God is so against homosexuality is because it's not what He said it was supposed to be, and so therefore we should not accept that?
Correct. It's what we were designed to do, and to for example, we're not designed. For example, why don't you consummate with donkeys?
Because I see that to be immoral. There's an extreme lack of communication and consent between the two species. It wouldn't be right. It would be abusing the
Okay, but
animal.
what makes you what makes you say that consent has to be a part of it? Like what? Why are you subjectively saying that?
What does this have to do with why homosexuality is wrong in the eyes of God?
I'm trying to see where you get your moral framework from.
But that's not the question or the topic.
But that will get you right to the, so that answering this will get you right to my point. Because when you say you can't, you're saying consent, but still you would have to back that up with your moral framework. Like what's
Yeah,
supposed to happen is not being.
I ground my morality and empathy, and the framework is that I care about the well-being of an individual as well as the avoidance of unnecessary harm. That is my moral framework, and that is what it's based off of. How does that
That's
answer
based
the
on
question about
that's
God's
based on
view
your
on
subjective
homosexuality?
morality because
Okay,
it's not natural.
and God's subjective morality is what and why?
Huh?
And God's subjective morality on this is what and why?
That is wrong. That we're not. A man is supposed to be with a woman is supposed to be with a man, and that's what he
Okay, why?
created. Why?
Why?
For the main thing, the main thing is to procreate. That's the main thing. Number two is, of course, outside of procreating, he wants a husband and a wife to have that natural bond of doing that act. So it's not supposed to be with a man. He never created a man to do that with a man.
But what's the problem with it? So like
But think about
if
this.
God
Let me give you a
created
crazy
like
scenario. Let
this
me give you a crazy
procreation
scenario.
act, but you don't have to do it. Like
Let me give you.
I'm sure you would agree that Christian infertile people could still get married. They don't have to procreate. So
I didn't say that was the only thing.
why
I
can't
didn't say
two
that was the
men
only
get
thing.
married and not have to procreate? What if they do
I didn't
get
say.
married and they do take it upon themselves to procreate?
I didn't say that was the only thing. First off, I said the main one was to procreate. Number two was a bond between a husband and a wife, which is what he created for. Here's a good point
Sure.
too. Here's a good point too. The reason why it's unnatural too is because let's say I'm gonna do one category: homosexual men. They will not exist without heterosexual individuals.
Okay.
That
And
proves that it's not natural. So, for example, if you
so what?
guys had a
There are
whole
some heterosexual
hold
individuals that
on, let
don't
me finish.
exist that
Let me
wouldn't
finish.
exist without
Let me finish.
homosexual individuals.
Let me finish. So, if you guys had a whole civilization, you guys had a whole civilization
Who's you guys?
of you and your homosexual counterparts. So, if you guys had
What?
a whole
I'm not gay,
civilization,
but thank you for assuming.
oh, if you guys had a whole civilization of homosexual individuals in a whole community by yourself, you guys to prove that it's unnatural is you guys would need us to continue. Otherwise, y'all all die off
And that says it's not natural. How?
because y'all will die off.
I
So whatever is
either
not
in your
supposed to happen.
definition
Hold
or
on.
in my definition, that doesn't make sense because in my
Whatever's not
definition,
supposed.
it's still going to
Whatever's
occur
not supposed
naturally
to.
because the heterosexuals are still going to have children and some of them are going to be gay, and that's natural. In your
Whatever's not
definition of
supposed.
what's supposed to be, just because, oh, we just put all of them over there on an island and they died in a generation or two, that doesn't mean that
Whatever's
they
not
weren't
supposed to
supposed to
happen.
be. I would actually say what
Whatever's
you did was not supposed to be.
whatever's not supposed to happen will die off. Which is what I'm saying. So if you guys all go on the island, you guys need us. That show like if you guys need other individuals to survive, that shows you that it's not natural.
So every extinct species was not natural, and that's why they died off.
Nobody's saying just because you're extinct. I'm saying, for
Okay,
example,
so then you
outside.
can't say because they would die off. That means it's not
No,
natural.
no,
That
no.
makes
You're
no
looking at
sense.
you're looking at that as the only variable. I'm not saying that's the only variable. I'm saying, so remember, that's not the only variable. Because I believe outside of, because there's things of why they got extinct. There's reasons on why they got extinct. That's different. So
Sure,
I'm
and I think
I'm
the
saying
reason
outside.
from your example would be because there were some crazy people in the rest of society that decided to ostracize a certain community and make this minority die off, even though they would have to repeat this again in a few centuries because naturally homosexual people are born. So you're defeating your own
You're using the
argument.
wrong definition of natural again. So here's the pro. Once
Well,
again,
well, I told
remember,
you because it doesn't fit your definition or my definition because
I'm
that's why
using
I'm saying that your
Aristotle's
argument
definition.
doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
It does
your
make sense.
definition of what should be, and you're saying that they would die out because what shouldn't be
Will they
will
die out
die
or will they not?
out.
Will they die out or not?
Yeah, yeah. If you put all gay men in one place and left them alone and didn't give them any access to anything, sure. But here's my question to you:
Exactly. It's not natural.
Did you not say what should not be will die out? And then you went
That's
back
not the
on
only
it,
variable.
and then you went
You're
back on it
looking
and
at
said, "Oh, just because they died, certain species doesn't mean that they shouldn't have been." So your logic doesn't make any sense with this, this, oh, it shouldn't be being the definition for natural because that just makes this argument even more illogical.
no. You're
So
looking at that.
why does God view this as wrong?
You're looking at that as if that was the only variable I gave, which it was not. So that's the problem with that. So usually when you hear people, you got to hear all the, whether you hear the variables or not. You can also allow the person to expound.
Which
So
other
that's not
variable
the.
would you like me to focus on?
I'm not looking for any other variable. I'm saying there are other variables. So if a
Okay,
species
name
goes
them.
if a species goes extinct, then the variable that caused them to go extinct was not just because they were not supposed to happen. It's because of natural phenomenons in nature that took place, or a plague of disease. So there's those types of variables that can cause a species to go extinct. But outside of all that stuff, the homosexual community, you can just there you don't have to add any kind of variable, just them on an island, and they will go extinct. That shows that they're not supposed to exist or supposed to be.
How? How does that show they're not supposed to be?
Because if they were supposed to be, they would last. They would continue. They would not die off.
They will continue because the
No, they
heterosexual
won't.
people
Not
in the rest
not
of
not
society are
long.
going to continue giving birth to homosexual people.
No, no.
Homosexuality will
I'm
continue.
saying if
Just because you offed a few people over here does not mean that homosexuality ceases to exist.
you're not hearing what I'm saying. I'm saying if, let's say you had a whole island of homosexual men, only men, you guys will die off.
But that does nothing to stop homosexuality.
But I'm saying, yeah, it's not going to stop homosexual. But I'm
Okay,
showing you why.
you're saying that homosexuality shouldn't be, and yet you have given an argument that does not stop homosexuality or does not cease it at all.
I'm not talking.
You're
But
giving an argument where you would end up ending the lives of an island full of people. And
I'm
is
not
that
making
really
an.
the argument you want to give?
I'm not making the argument that you're not going to cause another individual that's eventually going to be homosexual. You're mishearing what I'm saying. Nobody's saying that. I'm not saying that when two heterosexual individuals procreate, that individual that they created is not going to be homosexual. That's not the argument that I'm making. So you keep hearing things that I'm not saying.
Yeah, but
What I'm
okay,
saying
so maybe
is
you don't understand my question. My question is, why does God say homosexuality is wrong? You're trying to give a natural argument, which is fine, but the problem is that your definition for natural is what shouldn't be, and you're saying that we know this because if we put a whole bunch of gay men on an island, they would all die off, and therefore
correct.
we know that homosexuality shouldn't be. But homosexuality doesn't die off. Homosexuality continues on. If anything,
We're not talking about
you
that.
took people, a minority group, you've put them somewhere else, and you have left them to die. That just shows the cruelty of humanity, and most specifically this perspective and this argument. That has nothing to do with showing why homosexuality shouldn't be, because homosexuality
I
will still
believe
continue on naturally.
once once again, we're not talking about two heterosexual individuals creating an individual that's going to eventually become homosexual. You keep misunderstanding that. I'm not saying that. You keep thinking that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. That's why you keep going
I
back
don't
to
think
this
you're
point.
saying that. I think you're ignoring that, and that's why I brought it up.
But that's not the point. That's here's the problem with the
I know it's
conversation.
not the point because it puts a flaw in your argument. But I would like a
That's not a part of
question.
my
I would like an
argument.
answer to the actual question from
I
God's perspective
answered.
in the Bible. Why is this an
I gave.
abomination?
I
Why is
already
it
answered
worthy
that
of the
with.
death penalty?
Okay, so that's a different question now. Why is it worthy of the death penalty?
No, well, I mean, I brought it up initially, and this has always
You
been
never
about
said
what the
death penalty
Bible
this whole
says.
conversation.
Yeah,
I know,
actually,
but
no. When we first started, I said we see a couple of verses where God talks about how this shouldn't happen, and we even see the death penalty be given for it. And
okay, well that's the first time I'm hearing death penalty. So
okay,
you're saying what was your question?
why does God have a problem with homosexuality so much that He gives the death penalty for it?
Because he wants his people that represent him to do things correctly, otherwise you're blaspheming him. So for example, if it's not going to represent him and you're claiming to be his people that's going to represent him to all nations in the world, he wants that stuff to stop because it's not representing him.
So
If God is
is it
claiming to
just the
be all holy,
homosexual sex, or is it the fact that it isn't two people sharing that loving bond? Because what's wrong with two men or two women sharing that loving bond, getting married and having sex?
he did not create two individuals or two same-sex individuals to do that. That's not why he created
Okay, He
a
didn't
man
create
and a
us to
woman.
drive in cars either. Are cars a sin?
Okay, that's adding a different variable. That's not what I'm saying either.
No,
So,
no. I'm
well,
saying that people do things, practices, and actions in their lives, and God has put certain sins, labeled certain of them as sins. And you're saying because God didn't create us in this certain way, we shouldn't be doing it. Well, God didn't create us to get inside automobiles and go 70, 80, 100 plus miles an hour. Is it a sin that we're doing it?
no, that's not a sin. A sin is what he says when he says, don't do this, that becomes a sin. And he said, don't be a part of those types of acts.
Okay, why not? What's wrong with it?
Once again, he created a man to be with a woman, to procreate, for one. That's one. That's one. That's one. To procreate, one. Two, for the bond between a husband and a wife to be shared in that way, to be expressed in that way.
So why can't two men that love each other and have that bond adopt an unwanted child and raise a good family?
Because God didn't create two same sex individuals to do that.
Would God rather the child remain parentless and on the street than be adopted by two gay men?
100%.
Really? You think God would prefer that children starve and remain homeless than be adopted by a loving gay couple?
So this is a crazy hypothetical, but
It's
let's
not.
play.
If we allowed more gay people to have more access to adoption and an easier time to the to access the foster system, the amount of kids that would be able to actually find a home would go up immensely. But that we have so many that are mostly religious led, Catholic, more so Catholic, not really so Christian, but like Catholic led adoption agencies and stuff like that that will deny gay parents because of a religious thing. And I don't understand how you can have a God that says take care of the orphans and feed the needy and take care of the widows if you're going to say that children need to stay in orphanages.
So once again, remember, I can create a hypothetical that says, would God allow? Would God rather you throw a baby off the building or have two homosexuals? So it shouldn't be based off of crazy hypotheticals. What God does not want to happen is two same-sex individuals being together. You can add another variable. Okay, between this and this, what does he prefer? You can do that all day. But we're not talking about between two things. We're talking about what God allows and what God doesn't allow.
Okay, so God just hates homosexuality so much that it's worthy of death, and we're supposed to be okay with that?
Whether you're okay with it or not, if you're the creator of all things, if you're just a creation, what are you going to do about it?
Do you do you think that we should follow that?
If you're just a creation, what are you going to do about it?
I can't do anything about how God feels about it, but I can do my best to understand it and try to explain why I think it's messed up. That's all I can do with anybody. God's no different.
Okay, if you're just to create, how could the creation tell the creator that is messed up?
Just simply, just like I did. The creator doesn't have to give a shit, but that's on the creator, not me.
So think about this: the creation is telling the creator that's messed up.
Yeah, can you? Okay, so imagine this. I'm sure that you've heard this passage a lot, where it says that we are the clay and God is the potter and stuff, and He molds us and shapes us. So imagine that you are actually doing that. You're making a vase out of clay and stuff, and like cool. I don't know if you've ever done that, in school or whatever. It's actually a lot of fun. You can create all kinds of things. Now, let's say that you create a few pieces. They seem really great. They turned out amazing. You're only getting better and better. And then you create a piece, and somehow you can magically give it life. And as you're shaping it, it's crying and screaming and begging you to stop, saying that it's in pain and that it hurts. And you're saying, it's okay, I know better. And even after you pass it through the fire and have solidified it in that state of agony, and torment, and it's saying, please, I'm hurting, and you're like, nah, but look at you, I'm going to paint you all pretty, and I'm going to put you on display. And this vase is crying in a case saying, please, I'm hurting, this hurts me. You as the creator can choose to ignore it and say, nah, I look at all this glory you're bringing to me. People are saying, look at what you made. This is basically how God is in the Bible. And so I don't understand why He would give the gift of life if He isn't going to care about what you think or feel. That's just cruel. That's very evil, in my opinion. So how is it that you can defend such a thing and not side with me that just because they're the creator and can do whatever they want, that doesn't mean that it's right? Of course I can tell them, hey, this is hurting. Hey, this isn't right. Hey, this isn't fair. That doesn't mean they have to listen to me, but I can still tell them that.
Who's hurting you? Things in the creation or the creator?
Well, it depends. It depends on what it would be. So if God is saying that homosexuality is a sin worthy of death, and then He creates people that are homosexual, then He is inflicting that.
How? Okay, you don't create somebody that is homosexual, because that's what you develop your likes over time. So, for example,
people have those parts that form in their brain, and yes, over time with puberty, that will all come to fruition. But that doesn't mean that those aren't the traits that they were born with.
So, for example, that's kind of like saying I was created to be an adulterer because that's in me.
That makes no sense. No.
That's what I'm saying. So a sin, he's not creating you with the ability to do the sin.
An adulterer is an action that you do.
Homosexuality
is a part of your identity of who you are.
Okay, if the quote unquote, if a homosexual,
what is homosexuality?
When you're attracted to the same sex. So
what is adultery?
Bro, we know. Hold on, 1 second. You made me see my.
No. I'm showing you how one is an attraction that is based on an individual and who they are, and one is an action that somebody does. Do you see the difference?
So what I'm saying is this.
Do you see the difference between the two?
I don't want to forget my point. 1 second. So I'm saying
I don't want to forget mine.
If an individual that claims to like the same sex, if the person likes the same sex, if they like the same sex, if they act on it, that's where the sin comes.
Okay, so you're saying that the being homosexual is not the issue, but actually having gay sex. What about a crush? What if a man looks at a man and says, "Man, that guy is attractive," and they like what they see?
They shouldn't speak on that. They shouldn't speak on that. They shouldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. What if they don't? What if it's just something that they thought in their mind?
If they're not acting on it, good.
Okay, well, then that goes against what Jesus said when He said that you do that in your heart. It's as if you just did the action. So it seems that biblically it doesn't fucking matter. Jesus. Even if a boy in high school has a crush on another boy, God sees that as a sin. Boom, in your heart you did the bad thing. Homosexual. That doesn't make any sense.
So Jesus can't rephrase the commandments. So when He says if you do it in your heart, what He was saying is usually when you do it in your heart or in your head, like for example, if I like somebody's wife in my heart, it's going to eventually manifest to where I actually do things. So basically He's talking about cleansing your minds and your hearts as well too. but he can't redefine. For example, Eve could have ate the apple in her heart before she actually did it in person. So he's just saying, cleanse your minds from doing these
I
acts
actually
in
don't
your.
think she could have, but I think I understand what you're saying. I would slightly disagree because I think what Jesus is saying is that yes, if you obsess over like your neighbor's wife, that will cause issues. But the thing is, like, if it got to the point where I'm like, man, my neighbor's wife, I see her, uh, go to the grocery store or whatever. I see her when she walks out to the car. She looks hot, great. And over time, I start thinking about her when I don't see her, and I start thinking about wanting to be with her, and I start fantasizing about, well, I could be better to her than her husband, and I start fantasizing about her sexually. To God, that's all right. You've entertained it, and you may as well just do it. In my eyes, the sin is the same. You have crossed the line. I don't actually have to physically go over and do something or actually be like, oh, I might do something. I have already done the sin.
You only do this sin if you physically do it.
Interesting. So you don't agree with Jesus?
No, that's just misunderstanding Jesus. For example, if Mary, or not Mary, if Eve ate the apple in her heart before actually eating the apple, doing it in her heart and her mind, that's not the sin. That's where the sin starts, because if you obsess over it, it can manifest into reality. But the sin comes about when you actually do it. That's why
How
Eve
could she have eaten it in her heart?
obsessed over it. Like, I need tastes, I need it, whatever. Obsessed over it. It could have happened in her mind before it happened in actuality. So that's not. So what Jesus was saying is basically cleanse your hearts and your minds so it doesn't manifest. Because what's ever shown in the heart will.
Oh, you got a violation warning. Well, it took you out because it said that you had a violation. If you have another account or something, feel free to come back. We can finish the conversation. Or if you want to risk it, you can just come back. But, oh gosh, David. David and taking his wives and forcing someone else publicly lie with them. Oh gosh. Wait, what about Jesus? Jesus' resurrection. Yeah, what is the best evidence we have for the resurrection of Jesus? I would like to know. Why did God allow slavery in his law? If you have an answer to that, I would like to know that too. Why is being homosexual wrong? Or if you think that the Bible condemns, the lesbians, bisexuals, transgenders as well, go ahead and send in a request and we can talk about that. And then, what good is blind faith, and why does God want it from us? Yeah, I saw little bits of you guys talking about David and his wives. If you guys haven't seen Mind Shift's video about David the Deceiver, I would highly recommend it. It had me rereading a lot of David's story. David did a lot of terrible things, and yet God only recognizes one bad thing that David did, which is him taking Bathsheba and having Uriah killed in battle, which is wild because all the other things that he did bad, God just sees it as it was fine. So when David took someone else's wife to make her his wife, apparently that was good. When David lied to the priests of God and got them all slaughtered, apparently that was good. When David sought refuge from a Philistine king and then raided that king's outer lands and then lied to the king saying he was attacking Israel, that was apparently good. When David ignored passing judgment on his firstborn son for violating his sister, apparently that was good. And when David, with his last words in the Bible, breaks a promise that he made before God, apparently that's perfectly fine and dandy. The story of David, and especially David being a man after God's own heart and being elevated in such a way, even though he was so quote-unquote broken, is just astonishing, because I think the more deeper I dive into it, the more I realize David wasn't this broken man that God used. David was a violent, horrific liar, and it seems that just fit well with what God wanted to do, and God just chose him so that he knew that he would have someone that would go out and do whatever he ordered, unlike Saul, who did not fulfill the genocide in 1 Samuel 15 the way God wanted, and therefore It cost him his kingship. Hey, Will, how are you?
Yeah, good.
Good, good. You a
So I just
Christian?
want to, yeah,
Awesome.
I just want to, I
How
want
long
to
have you
come
been
up
a
because I
Christian
want
for?
you to,
I'm sorry, real quick. Just how long have you
well,
been a Christian for? It just helps me just get a little bit to know
um,
about you.
so Roman Catholic since
Okay.
I've been born, and then when I was, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I turned Eastern Orthodox Christian.
All right, awesome. I got you. Thank you for sharing that. And so, what would you like to come up to talk about here?
Are you agnostic?
I'm an agnostic atheist. Basically, it means I do not have any knowledge of God or gods, but currently I hold no God belief.
I hear a lot of people say that. What is atheist not a contradiction of the definition of agnostic?
No, and that's a good question. So, Gnosticism has to do with knowledge, while theism has to do with your belief mainly in God or gods, or some kind of organized religion system. So agnostic is answering the question, what do I know about God or gods? And I have no knowledge about them. And then theism, what is my belief in God? I don't have any belief in any gods because I have no knowledge of any gods. So, if anything, agnostic atheist kind of complements each other and gives more of an understanding of my position.
So I was looking at the one prompt that said, "Why did God allow slavery in His law?" Do you have any examples of that?
Sure. I think the clearest passage that we see is in Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. Do you have a Bible with you?
Um, I do know, yeah.
So in Leviticus 25, God is speaking throughout the whole chapter. And in 45 or 44 through 45, he says, "As for your male and female slaves, whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born into your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly." So this is God giving rules and laws when it comes to the year of Jubilee and certain feasts. And he's saying in this passage specifically that they may have slaves. He tells them who the slaves may be, and he tells them that they are objects to be owned forever, and they can be passed on to the next generation. So when I think of slavery, the definition for that is the active practice of people owning people as property, and typically it involves forced labor. This seems to fit the active practice of people owning people as property, and we see that they don't have the same protections and equal status as free citizens, because the ending of verse 46 talks about how your fellow Hebrews, don't rule over them ruthlessly, but we don't see any such protections for the non Hebrew slaves that God just said they could have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Why? So I'm not here to like debate you or change your mind. I'm just here to understand why, so uh,
Yeah, no,
I can
no,
do
of
my own
course.
unbiased research. I'm not here to convince you of anything or
No,
tell you
of
you're wrong.
course, of course.
But my
And I'm
understanding of
not
the
going to
passage
tell you
is,
that you're wrong either. I would like to get your understanding, and I think that we can have a very good, informative back and forth with this. I just want you to know
yeah, the
that
only reason
I'm
I
not
come
going
up
to
here,
try to beat you over the head with this, saying, like, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. But yeah,
the only reason I come up here is to do apologetic, not apologetics, but to further my apologetics and really believe in what I teach because I don't believe in following something without truly knowing every detail.
absolutely. That's
So the
that's
way I
my that's my
understand,
only goal here is to help spark critical thought and hopefully inspire more research. So if that's what you're here for, then we're here for the same thing. So
the
I would say
only
that
um,
that's my strongest and clearest verse that I could provide to you to say this is where I recognize God in His law saying you can have slaves. Does that make sense?
my understanding, yeah, it does make sense. I'm not denying it. My understanding is that it was a debt that had to be paid, and that there was conditions for it. That was my understanding of it. Would that be correct?
Um, Not for the slavery that God allows in the Bible, but I do know what you're talking about. I forgot. Did you say you have your Bible with you?
I do.
I'll open up to Exodus 21. So Exodus 21 is where we see the debt servitude, and we see the rules and regulations for that. So starting in the very beginning, again, this is God speaking. He's speaking from the previous chapter where he gave the Ten Commandments. And it says, "Now these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go out free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, and then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. And if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife, that's the end of that. But basically, what we have here is these are the most of where we're going to see the rules and regulations when it comes to the debt servitude. Exodus 21 is talking about Hebrew to Hebrew relations, and so God is telling them that when they engage in this debt servitude, when they quote unquote buy a slave or servant from Israel, there's that time limit of he will serve 6 years and go out free in the seventh. So that's one of the regulations. Now, typically, they did this debt servitude for either repaying a debt, receiving aid, or some kind of resource, or to do some kind of work and get some kind of labor payment for them in some certain way. One of the earliest examples we see in the Bible of this is who is it? It's Jacob working for his uncle, for that certain amount of time period, so that he could get his wife, and then doing it again for Rachel. That would be an example of, those that kind of debt servitude. Jacob worked for Laban for housing, for aid, and for a wife, and then did it again for the other wife. And then we see that a man can sell his daughter, but it has to be to another Hebrew, and typically this is taken as so that she could be a wife, either for the man or for the man's son. And then there are rules and regulations regarding if they don't like her, what can happen after that. And then there's a clarification actually in Deuteronomy that does show that if the intention is not that she is sold for a wife, then she will serve for 6 years and also go out free in the seventh. So that is the indentured servitude that we see, where God is saying, hey, this is how you treat other Hebrews. If we go back to Leviticus 25, and you go to verse 35, it says that if your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. You shall take no interest or profit, but fear your God and your brother, that your brother may live beside you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him food at profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. And if your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. And so basically God is saying that if it's a Hebrew to a Hebrew, they're not supposed to be treated like a slave. They're supposed to be treated as a hired worker. They don't have any interest or anything like that added to their debts, because they are a fellow Hebrew and they ought to be treated as a hired worker or as a free sojourner. And then later, in just a couple of verses, we get who they can own as slaves, and we see that those protections are not given to them. We see that they don't have any certain time limits, and then they're free. They are possessions to be owned forever and passed on to the next generation. So we see two clearly different systems here. The indentured servitude and the slavery. And sometimes sometimes people get those two a little bit mixed up, but I think that there's a very clear difference in the scripture.
Yeah, I'd have to do some research, but I don't really have nothing to comment on that.
Okay.
Also, I haven't read the Old Testament, so I wouldn't be able to give you a logical explanation because I don't know one.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine. And like I said, this is just to, trade information and opinions. And I do want you to go and read this on your own. And yeah, I can't tell you what to conclude about it. I can just tell you my conclusion and why I think it's logical and consistent. You know?
Yeah. What about how can we know Jesus' resurrection from the dead is true?
Sure. So, you said you haven't read the Old Testament. Have you read the New?
Uh, not, I wouldn't be able to understand any specific things, but I have read through it. I would like if you brought up a specific thing, I wouldn't remember.
Okay. No problem. Well, if you want to turn there, you can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting in verse 12, it says, Now if Christ proclaimed as, or I'm sorry, now if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those who have all fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are all people who are most to be pitied. So this is basically saying that if you cannot show the resurrection was a real event, basically, then the foundation for your faith is in vain. And then you would be misrepresenting God because you would be saying God did this amazing thing and it is the biggest thing about our faith, and yet we can't show it actually happened. So what is the best evidence that we have for the resurrection of Jesus? What can we look at to say that this actually happened?
I would say many Roman historians, like the book of Annelius, I don't know if that's the correct saying. I also believe the over 500 people that not it's not a question of whether he was crucified because we know that to be true, right? Correct? You believe that?
I have no issue granting that. No.
Yeah, so it's not an issue of whether he was crucified, but whether he was
I
resurrected. And I think
I
that
think I think from my perspective on the historical evidence, I could get as far as Jesus existed and was executed by the state, most likely through crucifixion, and I think that's historically what I have seen data wise where I could stop. So
right,
everything
so
past that, I don't know.
for me it wouldn't make any sense to believe historians and people and their accounts of Jesus and for them saying that yes, he was crucified and that we just totally obscure the fact that people claim he was resurrected and there were no counterclaims that I've seen. There was no historian that I've seen say that no, Jesus did not resurrect. There's actually quite the opposite.
Can you name one historian that actually said he did resurrect?
Let me grab them real quick.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, algebra. I haven't forgotten about your DM, but I have work soon, so I wanted to just come up and do a live. But I'll respond to you later on tonight, and I'll take a look at what you said. I promise.
So the ones that I had pulled were Aeneas 1544, and it states that they were worshiping Christ and that he was crucified.
Does it say that he
And
resurrected from the dead?
not in that one. And then in a different one, it says Lycian of Sam Samosta, Greek sacratist in the second century. And it says that he was crucified and they were worshiping a man. I believe it talks about his resurrection. I'm not quite sure.
You,
My
you
notes are
said
kind of
Lycian
wrong.
of Samosta?
Yes.
All right. I took a
I
note of
don't
that. My
exactly.
my quick search says that he never said in his writings that Jesus resurrected, but I don't know about that. That's just a quick search, so I'll definitely add it
What
to my
about
notes to
in
look in.
Analysis? Analysis? Uh, Itactus, Chroman.
And does he say that Christ resurrected from the dead?
I'm not sure, but I do remember seeing a historian
Okay.
say that.
Okay. Um, to my knowledge and to my research, there is no historian that recorded Jesus rose from the dead. There are historians that wrote about the claims of Jesus' followers, but it was more in the sense of documenting them as a small yet growing sect.
I think,
That
yeah,
and
I
they
think
wrote down the claims that they said, but they never confirmed them to be true. As far as my knowledge goes, there is no historian that said Jesus did any miracles or Jesus resurrected from the dead.
I would have to look into it, but I think the exact quote or what I'm relating to is that in analysis, he was saying that he didn't say that Christ did resurrect, but he was saying that the worshipers were saying that he resurrected. I
Yeah,
think that's what I
okay.
was.
That would definitely agree with what I just said. I agree with you that we have historians that document this small group growing and what their claims were, but
Right.
that isn't evidence that the resurrection happened. And I also would say that we need to also vet the historians too, because um, Dean, there's Emperor. I'm
I think
probably gonna say
Tacitus
it
is pretty
wrong.
vetted.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. But and Tacitus was pretty much rejectful of Christianity altogether. He thought it was silly. But like I know Josephus and I believe Suetonius wrote about Emperor Vaspian doing healing miracles. Should we then just say, oh, look at these accurate historians that are pretty well vetted, saying that this emperor did healing miracles? This emperor clearly did healing miracles, or because they actually documented it as if it happened. I don't, and yet that
Well,
hasn't convinced me. So, do you think that? I would say that if we're looking at that from this base of a level, that has a lot more evidence for being true, and yet I still think it hasn't met its burden of proof. What do we
that
have
does
for
make a good
Jesus?
point.
Yeah.
That does
And
make a
then
good
and
point.
then
I
your
just
your second
believe
point was the 500, right?
yeah,
Was
the
was was
500
that what you
witnesses
said?
and the people that were crucified.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
the people that were crucified.
Okay. So for the 500, do you know anywhere where I can find the list of those 500 names and their verified testimonies?
No,
Okay.
it
So
was
we have.
specifically. I'll recorrect myself. Not 500
Okay. All right.
because I
Because
can't
I
vet
do
that
know
there
that
was
the
500, but
Bible.
I'll say multiple.
Because I know that Paul in the Bible makes a claim that there are 500 witnesses, but we don't have their names or their testimonies or any way to validate their testimonies. So I could say, 1,000 people a year claim to be abducted by aliens, but so what? If I can't show you who these 1,000 people are or what they say and how we can check, what good is saying that?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest reason is why would people A, make up a lie, and then B, suffer the consequences? And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any one of them rejected Christianity while they were being crucified.
Are you talking about the apostles?
Yes,
Okay.
and
I
the
think
martyrs for the
I think
faith.
only two of them were crucified, um, historically and
I think there
traditionally.
was a lot more than two.
Of the apostles, I think it was only one or two because the rest died by like beheading and stoning and being impaled, and I think someone was boiled, but I think they survived that, and I think that was John. But but I do know that there were other Christians that faced, horrific persecution later on. But as far as the 12 apostles, I think it was only Andrew and Peter that faced crucifixion. Um, have you heard of Sean McDowell?
No.
All right. Sean McDowell is a Christian PhD holder who wrote his dissertation paper on the evidence of the martyrs of the apostles. And you can find his paper on Ebola University. And he concludes that due to the historical evidence we have, we can only confidently say that there were only 2 to 3 confirmed martyrs of Jesus from the apostles. Everyone else is just, there's just not enough evidence to confirm. It's just church tradition. It's just church stories. And that is Peter, Paul, and then depending on if you're convinced of the evidence, you could say James. So I find it very easy to believe that in this small growing sect or cult, 2 to 3 guys that were very influential truly believed this, and that inspired other people to then follow after them. We see that happen in lots of cults and sects around the world, all throughout history. So it doesn't it doesn't really I guess seem that different to me than anything else.
Yeah, that's a good point. And now that I'm looking at it, unfortunately, I have to go, but I will stay and come back.
Yeah, for sure. It was a pleasure talking with you, Will. And if you
Thank you.
want, I do post my lives on my YouTube. It's right up here, The Atheistic Preacher. So if you missed any of the Bible verses or references that we talked about, by tomorrow morning you should be able to see it and re-listen. Anything that you may have missed or wanted to catch, you can go through it again. And you're always welcome to come back.
What you said you're gonna post them?
Yeah, yeah, I post my lives.
All right. Thank you.
All right, take care. Have a good day. All right, I think we had a good conversation.